Shooting the shit about the Suns since 2019.
Hey, thanks for pressing play and welcome once again to another edition of the Suns Jam Session Podcast, the original post-game podcast on Planet Purple, brought to you by the Bleav Podcast Network and FanDuel. No Suns game tonight, but we're going to do something a little different here. It's the All-Star break, and I've been in the lab, man. Working on a project that I've been working on for about a month and a half now. And I thought that I would present it to you in podcast form for you to listen to as you try to get through this week as we prepare for the Phoenix Suns to once again play on the 19th against the San Antonio Spurs. But that's not till Thursday. It's Sunday night as I'm recording this live on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, all the places. But if you're an audio listener of this podcast, we got a little bit of an anthology here. The Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid. Something that, again, I've been working on for a while. I have a series of articles being released on brightsideofthesun.com going through the different tiers and explaining what this is. And I figured, you know what? I've done the work. I've spent the time. I've made the graphics. So I thought I'd release it in podcast form and just do it kind of a couple tiers each night for the next 3 nights and give you something to watch, listen, and engage with. So I will be reading my story, so hopefully it doesn't come off as too bland, but, again, a lot of time and effort went into this. So I thought we'd get into the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid and really starting to break down and taking an opportunity during this downtime of the season to kind of reflect on what the Suns are relative to their history and where certain players fall in the hierarchy of the greatest players to play for this organization. So let me get into this right after this.
The Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid.
That's right, the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid. So I began this journey on January 2nd. I'm sitting in front of my computer, and I have a salad and go coffee in hand. I like their cold brew. Like, I'm a price for value paid guy, and they win that race every time. And an idea hits me, and it's an ambitious one, and it's messy, and it's absolutely going to take time. And it's probably the type of thing that belongs in the Suns' offseason or neatly tucked into the All-Star break where the calendar finally exhales. So that's my plan. Start it now on January 2nd, let it breathe, revisit it through the first few weeks of 2026, poke at it, argue with myself, change my mind, repeat. The subject is the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid. So what is the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid? Think Bill Simmons and the Book of Basketball. Think his Hall of Fame logic. Now drop that framework into the 58-year history of the Phoenix Suns. This is about identifying the 21 best players to ever wear a Phoenix uniform out of the 453 who have donned the purple and orange and arranging them into a 6-level pyramid. Why a pyramid? Well, because it forces clarity and it allows movement. Players aren't locked into a rigid ranking, right? It's not like he's number 18, now he's number 17. They live in tiers. And if you know anything about Suns rank, which I also do on Bright Side of the Sun, you know that I'm somebody who likes tiers, and it makes for a good looking graphic. And for those of you watching, I pulled the graphic up. And so it starts with levels. You have 6 tiers. You have the top tier, which has 1 player in it. That's the face of the franchise. You have the second tier, which is organizational royalty, which consists of 2 in the second tier. The third tier, you'll never guess how many players, 3. The franchise pillars. Tier 4 has 4 players that are the era-defining stars. Tier 5 has 5 players that are all-star impact. And Tier 6 are the core contributors. So I think these work. As I've gone through my list over the past month and a half, building tiers and defining what it takes to be in each one, this is where I've landed. You might have a different version with different differentiators and different criteria, and I look forward, to hearing how you would have navigated this process. This is how I've navigated mine. As I start digging into who the best 21 players actually were, I already knew I was going to run headfirst into some baseline rules. Think of them less as hard laws and think of them more as gatekeepers. Each tier kind of has their own bouncer. Some rules you help you qualify, others escort you to the door. It's not mandatory to have a clean statistical cutoff for every tier, but thresholds matter. Sometimes there's a difference between getting in and being left out. Like take tier 3 of the Suns pyramid, the franchise pillars. Every player in that tier lives in the Ring of Honor. More importantly, every one of them spent over a decade in Phoenix. 10 plus years is the line if you want to make it into tier 3. If you do not cross it, you do not get through. But it's not necessarily exclusive, because a player in my top 2 tiers, and I bet you can guess who that is, wasn't in Phoenix for 10 plus years. So the tier themselves might be gatekeepers, but it isn't that clean. There can be exceptions to the rule if the brain trust determines it to be so. And since I'm the brain trust, I'm granting a special exemption to that player in tier 2. I also have a special exemption for a player in tier 3, not just miss the 10 season cutoff. So another rule that has to be crystal clear from the jump. This is not a lifetime achievement award for famous names passing through town. This is about impact in a Suns uniform. It's about what you did here and how much you moved the needle while you were wearing the purple and orange. Gail Goodrich is a quality example. He was a 5-time All-Star, an NBA champion. He's a Hall of Famer. Quite the impressive run there for Mr. Goodrich. But he also played just 2 seasons in Phoenix from 1968 to 1970. He made an all-star team here, but his real impact on the league was stamped in Los Angeles. And the same conversation goes with Shaq. He's a 15-time all-star, 4 championships, 2 scoring titles, 14 all-NBA teams. He's a walking monument to dominance. But he also only spent 2 seasons in Phoenix, 1 all-star appearance. A memorable stretch, sure, but not a defining one. And that's the point. This pyramid isn't about grading careers. It's about grading Suns chapters. Time spent matters. Impact matters. The totality of what you did elsewhere does not. So no, Gail Goodrich is not making the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid. Neither is Shaq. Not because they weren't great, but this is about Phoenix and only Phoenix. To be in tier 5 or above, you need to be an all-star and a multi-time all-star at that. There have been some fun role players in Phoenix, and there's plenty of room for them in tier 6. But to be considered one of the greatest ever, you have to have represented Phoenix in an all-star game, thus serving as an ambassador for the city abroad. You want another rule? Fine. Let's make it a petty one. Kevin Durant played 145 games in a Suns uniform. So here it is. Officially, unscientifically, and with a straight face. The KD rule. What's the KD rule? To be eligible for the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid, you must have appeared in 146 or more games with the franchise. Why 146? Because that's one more than Kevin Durant. That's the line. That's the bar. Cross it and we can talk. Fall 1 game short of it and you're a footnote. Shaq played 103 games, so he fell victim to the KD rule as well. Is it petty? Absolutely. Is it arbitrary? Without question. It's also perfectly on brand for a project like this. 100%. It's harder than it sounds. I'm not even sure why I landed on 21 players instead of 15, which would be clean and orderly and easy to explain. But like once you factor in that there's already 12 players sitting in the Ring of Honor, 15 doesn't leave much oxygen in the room. And honestly, I want oxygen. I want friction. That's the whole point of this thing. I want debate. I want back and forth. I want this to be a community exercise where people can argue tiers, guys move up and down, and make the case for who belongs or who got snubbed entirely. And I know my biases are going to show. I'm not a big DeAndre Ayton guy. I love Stephon Marbury. Will they make the pyramid? You have to watch and find out. But this is subjective by design. But it's also fluid. These things evolve. Maybe one day a player like Colin Gillespie works his way up the list. That sounds wild now, but maybe it stays that way. Time is the real author here. All I am doing is putting the framework on the page. So that's the plan. That's the goal. And with the All-Star break being as the runway, we have the time to let this breathe, to roll it out slowly, one lay at a time, one article at a time on Bright Side of the Sun, 2 tiers at a time, and over 3 episodes on the Sun's Jam Session podcast. There's no need to rush it. There's no dumping it all in one day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by laying out the 6 levels of the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid. From there, you could probably guess where I'm headed with certain players. That part is unavoidable. But there is a real debate to be had, especially in the bottom 3 levels, which we'll get to in a couple episodes. And that's the baseline of what we're doing here. Okay? Now what we're going to do is start talking about the levels. Tier 6. So the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid was never going to be an easy exercise, and I knew that going in. What I did not fully appreciate was how much mental real estate this would ultimately occupy for me personally. I've gone back and forth on pieces of this for a month and a half. I've been revisiting names, shifting thoughts, doing my research, second-guessing myself at odd hours, and nothing, in my opinion, was tougher than the bottom tier. Because the 5 tiers above it have some natural guardrails. They have lines of demarcation you can point to. They have rules you can apply. They have tenure. There's accolades. Impact feels settled over time. But that bottom tier, tier 6, with 6 players, it doesn't offer that kind of comfort. Because this is where bias walks right in the door and then sits down on the couch. This is where statistical cases can be made for players who got in and players who did not. And this is where personal preference starts driving the car. Maybe you value rebounding more than I do. Maybe you think awards should carry more weight. Maybe longevity matters less than peak. All those arguments live here. That's why tier 6 was a grind. Not because it lacked importance, but because it lacked too many plausible answers. So let's get into it. I'll briefly touch on some honorable mentions first, fully aware that I'm going to leave someone out. That's unavoidable. That's how projects like this work. But before we start debating names, let's take a look at the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid with tier 6 filled in. Now, if you take a look at this, you'll see that the 6 players I have are Dennis Johnson, Stephon Marbury, Larry Nance, Raja Bell, Eddie Johnson, and Goran Dragic. Now, there's only 21 names that can be in the overall group, which means there's always going to be players left standing outside the door. And some of those omissions feel obvious. Others are going to spark arguments. And honestly, that's a part of the point. I think Boris Diaw, Mikal Bridges, Leandro Barbosa, Mark West, Grant Hill, Paul Silas, Goran Dragic, they all have legitimate cases to land in that bottom tier. If you want to put any of them there, I truly don't have a problem. If like PJ Tucker's your guy, I get that too. Like, I'm not here to shut that down. Where I ultimately landed is rooted in impact. What did you give the organization while you were here, and how did that show up over time? Because sometimes that impact came through winning basketball. Sometimes it came through culture. Sometimes it came through stability in moments where stability mattered. I Bleav the players I slotted in that tier 6 did more for the Suns than some of the other names that get floated in the conversation, even if that contribution looked different from player to player. And that's where we get into it, because those differences matter. Those capacities are worth unpacking. I think Mikal Bridges was probably one of the hardest ones to keep off of here, but ultimately I kind of landed in the space that he was like the 4th best player on that team. Was he a defensive anchor? Yes. But he's like the 4th scoring option. There's not a lot of great Mikal moments. And that's where I kind of landed. So let's talk about the first guy who shows up on my list, and that is Goran Dragic. He made it in to the tier 6 of the Suns all-time pyramid. 388 games played. He averaged 12.3 points per game, 4.5 assists. He had a most improved player and one all-NBA team while playing with the Phoenix Suns. So, you know how the NCAA tournament can invite nearly 70 teams in and still find a way to argue about the last 4 in and the last 4 out? It's a little ridiculous on its face, but that tension is baked into the exercise. With only 21 players making this pyramid, the same thing applies. There's always a last guy in. There's always a first guy out. And for me, that line landed with Grant Hill. And I love Grant Hill. His resurgence in Phoenix is what he brought night after night and the professionalism, the steadiness, the feel for the game, all that mattered. That version of Grant Hill was a gift. But when I got down to the final decision, I went with Goran Dragic for the 6th tier. Games played mattered. Time invested mattered. And then there was that season, the most improved campaign in 2013-14, the same year that he earned his lone All-NBA selection. He averaged 20.3 points per game that season, led a surprising Suns team to the edge of playoff contention, and did it as the engine, not the passenger. If the play-in tournament existed back then, who knows how far that group would have gone. And Goran was the reason it even became a conversation. He also handed out 5.9 assists per game that season, balancing scoring with control, pressure, and pace. He spent 6 total seasons in Phoenix across 2 stints. And along the way, he gave us one of the most unexpected and iconic playoff performances in franchise history in the 2010 postseason, Game 3 against the Spurs. He dropped 26 points on 10 of 13 shooting and went a perfect 5 of 5 from deep. Even more absurd is 23 of those 26 points came in the 4th quarter alone. The Spurs had 24 in the 4th. That night still lives in Suns lore. It feels unreal, and for me, it's enough. That's why Goran Dragic gets the final spot in Tier 10. It's a tough one, right? Because I know that, again, everybody has their own player preferences. But for me, what he did there, that's why he's in, is he was a primary guy on a primary team. Next player on Tier 6, Eddie Johnson. 222 games played. He averaged 18.4 points per game, 4.1 assists. He earned 1 NBA 6th Man of the Year while playing with the Phoenix Suns. Eddie Johnson was on the team when I first started watching basketball, and there's one thing you need to know and understand right away. This dude was an absolute fucking bucket. To this day, he still sits 3rd all-time in free throw percentage in franchise history, shooting 87% during his 3.5 seasons in Phoenix. That alone is impressive, but what really jumps off the page is how much damage he did in a relatively small role. He averaged those 18.4 points per game across 222 games, and he only started 70 of them. That is the definition of instant offense. Eddie came off the bench, and he kept the scoring pressure relentless. There was no let up. That is why he won 6th Man of the Year in 1988-89, and then finished 3rd in the same voting the following season. Those Suns teams ranked 2nd in offensive rating in 88-89 and 3rd in 89-90, and that did not happen by accident. In 88-89, he averaged 21.5 points a game. He played in 70 games. He started 7. That tells you 21.5. That tells you everything you need to know about how devastating he was in that role. You could not stop the offense, and Eddie Johnson walking off the bench was a massive reason why. Most people know him today as the colorful voice on Suns broadcasts, the guy with stories, the guy with opinions. But when he played in Phoenix, he was a real problem. And if you were on the other side when he checked in, you felt it immediately. All right, we got 2 down in Tier 6. Number 3, Raja Bell. 254 games played with the Phoenix Suns, 13.4 points per game, 3.3 rebounds per game, 42.2% from beyond the arc in his time in Phoenix, and 2 All-NBA defensive teams for Raja Bell. Now, if you are under 30, you are probably still wrapping your head around how much one defensive player can tilt the temperature of an entire team. What Dillon Brooks has done this season feels jarring if you have not lived through it before. It looks like an anomaly. It feels like a culture shock. But this is not new around here. You have to go back to 2005 to find the closest parallel, when the Suns signed Raja Bell as a free agent and quietly changed the personality of the entire roster. That team needed to get tougher, full stop. And while I still don't agree with the decision to trade Quentin Richardson for Kurt Thomas, oh man, that one still to this day pisses me off. And I'll always carry a soft spot for Joe Johnson and his size and shooting. The addition of Raja Bell was a direct response to the San Antonio Spurs. That was the problem to solve. and Raja personified the answer. This is one of those cases where I had to let the player override my personal bias. Because if I'm being honest, I was never a huge Raja Bell guy. I was a scorned fan. I wanted Joe Johnson to stay. I thought the offense would keep humming if you trusted that core and let it grow. And to Raja's credit, that offense did keep humming. He did not break it. He enhanced it. Over 3.5 seasons in Phoenix, he made 2 All-NBA defensive teams. He currently ranks 5th all-time in three-point percentage at 42.2%. He sits 3rd all-time in three-pointers made per game at 2.4, with Grayson Allen currently holding the top spot. That's real production layered on top of real defensive value. And then there's the moment, the one that never fades. Raja Bell taking down Kobe Bryant. Something every Suns fan has fantasized about. Something almost no one gets to actually do. And he did it, and it lives forever. So no, I was not waving the Raja Bell flag at the time. But respect is earned, and he earned every ounce of it. What he brought to Phoenix shaped teams. It changed tone. And whether I liked it or not, he belongs in this conversation. Next up in Tier 6 is Larry Nance. 487 games played, 17.3 points per game, 7.8 rebounds per game, 1.9 blocks per game. He's number 1 all-time in blocks in franchise history, 1 All-Star game appearance, and 1 slam dunk championship for Larry Nance. So this is one of those names that lives before my time, but it's impossible to ignore once you dig into what he was. Drafted 20th overall out of Clemson in the 1981 draft, he spent 7 full seasons in Phoenix from 81 to 88. That's not a footnote. That's a real stretch of meaningful time. Over those 7 years, Nance averaged 17.3 points and 7.8 rebounds per game. And at his peak, he climbed to 22.5 points in 86-87 and 9.9 rebounds in that same the next year, 87-88. And those numbers still hold weight when you place them in context. He sits 10th all-time in minutes played in Phoenix Suns history, 4th in total rebounds, and he remains the leading shot blocker the franchise has ever had. Those were not always stable years for the organization. The Suns went through turbulence, uncertainty, and stretches where winning wasn't guaranteed. And through all that, Larry Nance was the steady presence, the constant, the guy you could count to show up, play above the rim, and impose himself on games in ways that numbers alone do not always capture. He made that all-star team in 1985, which feels right when you look at his body of work. And then there's the dunk contest. 1984, he went toe-to-toe with Dr. J, and he beat him. The next year, he came back and he lost, but he lost to Dominique Wilkins. That alone tells you the kind of air he lived in and the kind of athlete he was. When you step back and you look at the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid, it becomes hard to justify leaving Larry Nance out. He bridges an era and covers a gap in the franchise timeline that was not only defined by success, he was a player who rose above the chaos and the clouds and left a permanent mark on the organization. Next up, we got Starbury, Stephon Marbury. 197 games played, 21.3 points per game, 8.1 assists per game, 1 All-Star appearance, 1 All-NBA team. Now here is where I fully admit my bias because I absolutely loved Stephon Marbury, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. He was not in Phoenix for long, just 2.5 seasons, but his impact landed hard and stuck. He bridged that gap between the Jason Kidd and Steve Nash eras, and in the moment, he felt like a breath of fresh air for a franchise searching for its next identity. Marbury played differently than what came before him. He attacked the basket with force, almost like a fullback hitting the hole, barreling down the lane while cradling the ball and finishing with that soft, patented floater that felt automatic once he got inside. When you go back and you look at the roster from that first season, it's almost jarring. That was Dan Marley's final year. Anthony Hardaway was on the team, but it was young, and it was the young electric core of Marbury and Marion that really grabbed you. And then the next year, the Suns drafted Amari Stoudemire, and the connection was instant. You could feel it. That team was fun in a way that felt like it was pointing somewhere. Playing with Starbury and Stat in NBA 2K3 was the way I spent my summer before shipping out to basic training. that's my bias, remembering fondly what that duo could do. I still remember losing my mind when Marbury hit that miraculous overtime game winner in the first round against the San Antonio Spurs. And they lost the series 4-2, but it didn't feel like a dead end. It felt like the beginning of something. The numbers back it up. His 21.3 points per game ranks 7th all time in Phoenix Suns history. His 39.8 minutes per game sits 2nd all time, which tells you how much responsibility he carried. He won Player of the Week 3 times in a Suns uniform, made an All-Star team, and earned an All-NBA third-team selection. So yes, my bias is absolutely part of why he's on this list, but that bias does not erase his case. It reinforces it. Stephon Marbury was a vibe in Phoenix. Coney Island's finest remains one of my favorite Suns of all time, and he earns his place in this conversation without apology. The last player in Tier 6 of the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid, Dennis Johnson, DJ. 236 games played, 17.5 points per game, 4.7 rebounds, 4.4 assists, 1.4 steals. He was an all-star once in Phoenix, an all-NBA team once in Phoenix, and was on the all-NBA defensive team 3 times. Now, if you want to really talk about players who truly made an impact, you do not have to look much further than Dennis Johnson, because what he brought to Phoenix on the defensive end was rare, difficult to replicate, and ultimately irreplaceable. Johnson arrived in Phoenix already wearing a championship pedigree, having won it all with Seattle in 1979. His arrival signaled a real transition for the franchise, especially considering he came over in a trade that sent Paul Westphal out the door, which alone tells you how significant that moment was. Westy, right? Traded to Seattle for DJ. Now, he only spent 3 years in Phoenix, but those 3 seasons carried real weight, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, where his presence changed the texture of games night after night. You can make a strong case that Dennis Johnson was one of the most impactful players in Suns history relative to time spent with the organization. In his first season in Phoenix, he averaged 20.5 points per game while also pulling down 1.9 steals. Across all 3 of his seasons with the Suns, he was named to the All-NBA defensive first team and earned a pair of All-Star selections. Yes, he would eventually move on to Boston. Rick Roby is who we traded him for, and he won 2 more championships there. He's Larry Bird's favorite teammate, or Larry Bird's favorite. Yeah, Larry Bird loved the guy. And it adds more shine to an already impressive career, but that does not diminish what he was here in Phoenix. For a short window, Dennis Johnson was the defensive backbone of the Suns, a player who brought toughness, intelligence, and an edge that the team needed at that point of its evolution. His imprint on the franchise remains one of the most dominant defensive stretches the organization has ever seen. So there you go. That's tier 6. Those are the core contributors. But the journey keeps rolling. And if I'm being honest, this pyramid has taken way more, so much mental space, more than I ever expected. I've kept circling back to names, revisiting tiers, and replaying arguments in my head. Every conversation I have with Suns fans add another wrinkle that makes me second guess a decision I felt good about an hour earlier. There's the fear of getting it wrong, or missing something obvious, or overlooking a moment that mattered to someone else. At the same time, I know what it is. It's subjective. It has to be viewed through my lens, guided by my standards, my memory, and my sense of what impact really means. It's the only honest way to do it. My memory, God help us. I think one of the biggest challenges with the whole exercise is the scope of it. I'm staring down the last 58 years of Phoenix Suns basketball, and I've only lived through about 38 of them with my own eyes. That leaves a full 2 decades of history that I did not experience in real time. Years I have to reconstruct through box scores and old clips and yellowed stories and whatever context I can mine after the fact. There's a difference between knowing something happened and feeling it happen. There are players whose impact lives in numbers and paragraphs for me, not memories. I can build a case. I can understand the logic. But I did not live the nights. I did not feel the temperature of the building or the way the guy changed the mood of a season. But that's also what makes this kind of fun. Our community is layered. There's fans who watch the podcast, read the articles, who've been around since 68. They've seen it unfold in real time. They know where the stories exaggerate and where the stats undersell the truth. They can tell me where I'm right. They can tell me where I'm dead wrong, and they should. The pyramid is not meant to be the final word. It's a conversation starter, a framework, a way to connect the eras, the memories, and arguments across generations of Suns basketball. And the best part is letting those generations talk to each other. So, without further ado, let's reveal Tier 5 of the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid. Tier 5, the All-Star Impact. Jason Kidd, Connie Hawkins, Tom Chambers, Dick Van Arsdale, Chris Paul. Now, this is one area where there's actually a clear line of demarcation because everyone on this list is a multi-time All-Star as a member of the Phoenix Suns. These are players who earn the right to represent the franchise on a national stage more than once. These are not one-off seasons or brief flashes. These are guys who showed up, produced, and carried the identity of the team with them when the lights were the brightest, and they earned the recognition through sustained impact and credibility in a Suns uniform. So let's get into it. Chris Paul, 194 games played, 15.1 points per game, 9.5 assists per game, 2 All-Stars, 2 All-NBAs. Now, Chris Paul is one of the true legends of the sport, a point guard who feels like he's part of a fading species. And we're talking about this with his retirement fresh and real, which adds weight to why he sits here and where he sits in the long annals of basketball history. Chris Paul spent 21 years in the league, and 3 of those seasons came in Phoenix, totaling 194 regular season games. And those games carried enormous significance for this franchise. He left Phoenix ranked 3rd all-time in assists per game at 9.5, led the league in assists in 2020-21 at 10.8 per night, and served as the engine of a team that reached the NBA Finals. His time in Phoenix included 2 All-Star selections, 2 All-NBA honors. He also ranked 2nd all-time in Suns history in assist percentage at 41.4% and 5th in free throw percentage at 86.7%. Remembering Chris Paul also means acknowledging that his body broke down in the postseason, something that followed him late into his career as he played through ages 34 to 37. That reality does not erase the impact. He arrived at an organization that had gone a decade without touching the postseason, and everything shifted. The Suns mattered again. They competed again. His influence on Devin Booker, a player who will sit much higher on this pyramid, defies clean measurement. The point guard did not fix everything, but he pulled the franchise out of stagnation, and that alone secures his place in Suns history. Next up, DVD. Dick Van Arsdale. 685 games played with the Phoenix Suns, 17.6 points per game, 3.5 assists per game, or 17.6 points per game, 3.5 assists per game, 3 All-Star selections, 1 All-NBA selection. Dick Van Arsdale. There's only one original Sun, and that designation belongs to Dick Van Arsdale, the Flying Dutchman. As a 6'5" shooting guard out of Indiana, Van Arsdale arrived in Phoenix through the 1968 expansion draft after coming over from the New York Knicks. He stayed in Phoenix until he retired in 1977, logging 9 full seasons with the organization and anchoring its earliest identity. The resume holds up. He ranks 5th all-time in games played, 6th all-time in total points, 3rd all-time in total offensive win shares, which still jumps off the page when you put it in historical context. He was a core member of a team that reached the first NBA Finals in franchise history in 1976. He earned 3 consecutive All-Star selections, starting with his very first season in Phoenix in 68-69. Statistically, his best year came in 70-71 when he averaged 20.2 points per game and carried a heavy load for a young franchise that was finding its footing. So why Tier 5 instead of Tier 6? Because every organization has a starting point, and for the Suns, Dick Van Arsdale was that point. The 68-69 team that finished 16-66 also featured another All-Star in Gail Goodrich, but Goodrich was traded in 1970. Van Arsdale stayed. He became the constant through the early years, the player who embodied what the Suns were before there was any real definition of success. Being the foundation is relevant. Dick Van Arsdale was not only productive, he was steady, he was present, and he's representative of a franchise that formed its first breath when he arrived. All right, 3 more players in Tier 5. Next up, TC, Tom Chambers. 380 games, 20.6 points per game, 6.6 rebounds per game. He had 3 All-Star selections, 2 All-NBA selections, and his 27.2 points per game is the number 1 mark in that category in franchise history. Tom Chambers. Some of my earliest Suns memories live in an offense that ran straight through Tom Chambers. Yes, Kevin Johnson was running the show, setting the table, and pushing the pace. But when it came time to finish the play, it was Chambers rising up and cashing it in over and over again with a consistency that defined an era of basketball in Phoenix. Chambers spent 5 seasons with the Suns, arriving in 1988 as the first unrestricted free agent in NBA history, a decision that mattered then and still matters now. He chose Phoenix, and in doing so, he became the centerpiece of some of the best Suns teams that rarely get talked about anymore. Everybody remembers 1992-93 when Charles Barkley showed up and changed the national conversation. But the groundwork was already there long before that. Those teams were good. In some seasons before Barkley, they were great. In Chambers' first year, the Suns went 55-27 and reached the Western Conference Finals. The next season, 54-28, same result, Western Conference Finals. In 1990-91, they finished 55-27 again and bowed out in the first round. And then came 91-92, a 53-29 season that ended in the conference semifinals. Over that 4-year stretch, when Chambers first arrived in Phoenix and before Barkley came, they were 217-11. It was a sustained run of winning basketball that positioned the franchise to take the final swing that eventually brought Barkley to town. The team could never quite get over the hump, but Tom Chambers was a massive reason why they were knocking at the door year after year. Individually, his production still towers over franchise history. His 27.2 points per game in the 89-90 season remains the gold standard for scoring in Phoenix. He holds the top 2 single-season scoring totals in Suns history, with 2,201 points in 89-80 and 2,085 points the year before. He made the All-Star team 3 times as a Sun, earned 2 All-NBA selections, and his 20.6 points per game average still ranks 8th all-time. Tom Chambers feels like one of the forgotten greats of the NBA. No player has scored more career points without reaching the Hall of Fame, and still baffling. It's him and Antoine Jamison, who have over 20,000 career points and aren't in the Hall. That 27.2 point season that he had in 89-90, that was 4th in league scoring that year. He trailed Michael Jordan, Karl Malone, and Patrick Ewing. But he finished ahead of Dominique Wilkins, Charles Barkley, Chris Mullin, Reggie Miller, Hakeem Olajuwon, and David Robinson. Every one of those names is enshrined. Chambers is not. He should be. And within the context of Phoenix Suns history, his place is clear. Tom Chambers belongs in Tier 5 of the Suns' all-time pyramid without hesitation, without apology, without revision. Connie Hawkins, 311 games played, 20.5 points per game, 9 rebounds per game, 4 All-Star selections, 1 All-NBA team selection. The Hawk. So Connie Hawkins arrived in Phoenix and immediately gave the Suns a sense of legitimacy. A player who lived above the rim and played the game with a style and confidence that felt ahead of his time. He was electric, he was graceful, and undeniably great. And he was the kind of presence that changed how a young franchise was perceived in the moment that he stepped on the floor. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Connie Hawkins' backstory, he carries a complicated one entering the league. Early in his career, he was swept up in a point-shaving scandal and banned from the NBA, a decision that later came to be viewed as a deeply unfair, and it was damaging. By the time he reached Phoenix, he was playing with both talent and something to prove, and the Suns benefited from all of it. A gifted player reclaiming his place and leaving a meaningful imprint on the franchise in the process. Following his passing in 2017, after Connie Hawkins passed away, Dave King wrote the following. If you didn't watch the Hawk when he played for the Suns he's like, I know you didn't watch the Hawk when he played for the Suns back in the late 60s. He joined the expansion Phoenix Suns in 1968 when he was 25 years old after stints in the ABL, Globetrotters, and ABA. He won the MVP awards in both leagues before and was Dr. J before Dr. J. Unfortunately, Hawkins had 8 of his best years ripped from him for being wrongly implicated in a point-shaving scandal in 1961. Despite obvious evidence to the contrary, his name wasn't cleared by the athletic world until 1969, during which time he was blackballed by colleges and the NBA. As it turned out, Hawkins never even knew about the point shaving. He just had the misfortune of knowing some of those who did and borrowing a couple $100 at one point from the attorney at the center of the scandal so he could pay some school expenses. That $200 was even repaid back to allow back to the attorney before the scandal even broke. Hawkins, a freshman in college who wasn't even allowed to play for the varsity team when the point shaving scandal was supposed to have occurred, still got blackballed by both the NCAA and NBA, even though he was never arrested or indicted. The Suns were assigned the 25-year-old Hawkins after he finally was cleared to play after winning a $1.3 million judgment in a lawsuit he filed before against the NBA for wrongful banning. During his 8-year exile from traditional basketball settings, Hawkins spent a few years traveling with the Harlem Globetrotters and winning MVP awards with both the ABL and the ABA. That's what Dave King wrote. So he spent 4.5 seasons with Phoenix, and that first year alone, he announced exactly who he was. In 81 games, he averaged 24.6 points, made the All-Star team, earned All-NBA first-team honors, and finished 5th in MVP voting, which tells you how loud his arrival was and how quickly the league took notice. He'd go on to make 3 more All-Star teams as a Sun, 4 total, and his 20.5 points per game still ranks 10th in franchise history. The way he played jumps off the page even now. He averaged the 3rd most free throw attempts per game in Suns history at 7.4 and logged the 4th most minutes per game at 37.8. In the 69-70 season alone, he attempted 741 free throws, the 2nd most ever in a single Suns season. Hawkins played through contact. He invited it, and he lived at the line because defenders had no clean answers for him. This is one of those players I never got to see with my own eyes, and that part stings a little. But sitting on my desk, I got it right here, is a 1971 Topps Connie Hawkins card. And every time I look at this thing, I feel like he would have been my guy if I'd been around then. It's a cool card. He was built different. He played with a force, an attitude, a physical edge, and it felt personal. The numbers tell the story, but the feeling of his game is what really lingers. At least so I'm told. All right, how many is that? 10 players? We got one more to go to finish out the top 2 tiers of the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid. That player, Jason Kidd. 309 games played, 14.4 points per game, 9.7 assists per game, 3 all-star selections, 3 all-NBA teams, 3 all-defensive teams, number 1 all-time in triple-doubles, number 1 all-time in assists per game. All right, Suns fans, this is where it really starts to get fun because Jason Kidd was an absolute stud during his time in Phoenix, and I remember that arrival vividly. He came over in December of 1996 in a trade that sent Sam Cassell, Michael Finley, and AC Green out the door. And that move landed right after one of the most directionless seasons I can remember. The season prior, 95-96, Sans Barkley Suns finished 41-41. It was their worst record since the late 80s, and the whole thing just felt stale, like a team stuck in place. Trading Michael Finley hurt because he was one of my guys. But what Phoenix got back was a young all-star point guard who had already shared Rookie of the Year honors with Grant Hill, and it felt like a real reset. Kidd's arrival was significant because it signaled the Suns were ready to compete again, and they did compete, even if the results never quite broke through the ceiling. Over 4.5 seasons, Phoenix never made it past the second round with Kidd. But the nightly product felt serious again. It felt organized and intentional in a way that it hadn't before. Statistically, Kidd's Suns run was loaded. He sits first all-time in the franchise history in assists per game at 9.7, sixth in total assists with 3,011, eighth in steals with 655, third in minutes per game at 38.9, and second in steals per game at 2.1, trailing only Ron Lee. He also owns the top spot in triple-doubles in Suns history with 25, nearly double Kevin Johnson's total of 13. Now, there's a very real case for him landing potentially in Tier 4. He was a 3-time All-Star in Phoenix, a 3-time All-NBA selection, a 3-time All-Defensive player while wearing the Suns uniform. And there are not many players in franchise history who stacked as much hardware during their time here. That alone carries weight. Where this lands for me is more personal and more subjective. And that's unavoidable when you do a project like this. The teams during his tenure never reached the heights you hope for when a player of that caliber is running the show. And those years between Barkley and Nash often feel defined by Kidd and Marbury filling space rather than delivering sustained success. On a stylistic level, his limitations always stood out to me. He shot 33.1% from 3 in Phoenix, averaged 14.4 points per game, and while he elevated everyone around him and rebounded at an impressive 6.4 rebounds per night, it often felt like there was something missing offensively. And then there's the way it ended. The allegations, the off-court issues, fries. And that became ugly and unavoidable chapter in his history and his story, and something that will always color how that era is remembered, that and his hair. For all of that, Jason Kidd still belongs firmly on this pyramid. And for me, Tier 5 is where he lands. Not as a dismissal of his greatness, but as an acknowledgement of the total picture, the brilliance, the gaps, and the complicated legacy he left behind here in Phoenix. And that, my fellow Jamsters, are tiers 5 and 6 of the Phoenix Suns all-time pyramid. I'll be coming to you live tomorrow to talk about tiers 3 and 4, and ultimately tiers 1 and 2 we'll do in a couple nights. But thank you for hanging out. Go home and love your family.
Hey, you're listening to the Suns Jam Session podcast, shooting the shit about the Suns since 2019.